Okay. This is Glenn Tracy, and I am going to talk about the first chapter and second. And I want to give you a concrete example of what's on page 19, because I feel that really is that's really the key to making a difference in talking about having a real multicultural curriculum. And I talked a little bit about it previously, but I want to give you a specific example. And let's take the Pilgrims. Everybody, when they were a kid in the United States, they had to talk about the Pilgrims. And level one's a contributions approach. Thanksgiving, and you cut out little turkeys, and people would be all happy, and they would be pumpkins, and the Pilgrims were black and white, and the pumpkins were orange, and the Native Americans had all kinds of feathers and things like that. And that was a visual example of what we thought the first Thanksgiving was like. Okay. There's not a lot of deep culture there. You could see a cartoon from 30 years ago and the same concepts there. It's really kind of a generalization, actually more of a stereotype. It doesn't go into the depth of what Thanksgiving means or the context of it within what it meant with the Pilgrims. In fact, people just assumed that Thanksgiving just was a continuous holiday. And I believe it first started with Abraham Lincoln, but I'm not going to give him credit for everything, but I think that may be pretty accurate. But there wasn't a third Thursday or fourth Thursday in November that was celebrated by the colonists as Thanksgiving Day. So we have our run-of-the-mill generic. You can go to Walmart and get all the Thanksgiving decorations. That's level one. And you might say a little bit about what the first Thanksgiving meant. A lot of people have misconstrued it as if the Native Americans were somehow agreeing to help the people invading their land. What actually happened, a lot of it is lost in the mists of time. We know that generally there was nothing but conflict. So a lot of times I would call what happens and what we talk about in the first Thanksgiving, we put it in the context of our own Thanksgiving now, as if the Thanksgiving then and the Thanksgiving now meant the same thing. And we know that historically something that happened over 300 years ago, 380 years ago or something, and happened in Massachusetts was not anything like what we have now. I remember reading that they served eel pie and fish, and I don't recall Thanksgiving with turkeys very much. And all you'd have to do is serve some eel pie, and unless you're a person with a real habitual love of eel pie, I mean, just the idea of an eel creeps me out, even though I know it's a fish, but it looks like a snake. Okay, so that's the level one approach. I don't know historically how valuable it is even. But let's say we want to go more. We do the additive, and it talks about content, concepts, themes, perspectives are added to the curriculum without changing of its structure. So maybe we give more information about it. So we talk about what was really going on with the Pilgrims there, and we look at it from a historical viewpoint. And we mainly look at it probably from the viewpoint of the Pilgrims. It would have been great to have a Thanksgiving because they were starving. There was disease. A lot of the early Pilgrims, I think, in the Plymouth colony had a huge die-off during that first year. They weren't prepared for the primitive nature of their lives. They brought along the Bible, and they brought along their faith, and they brought along some nails, and I'm sure some instruments like saws and hammers and things like that. and some salt and some flour and things to survive. But they didn't, they weren't professional hunters. And I can tell you the old muskets weren't very effective. So if we go with the additive approach, what would we put in there? I think probably we would go into more depth about maybe the kinds of foods that were available, the concept of survival. We would try to be more true to life with our recounting of the story, or pointing out how the common themes, and this would be for older kids. I mean, it depends. You probably couldn't serve eel pie in school cafeteria. But as kids are older and you want to give, although I do have to tell you that I think young people can handle very deep detail and intellectual challenges. That's just something you as a teacher have to make a decision. But you have to challenge kids, and you have to say, critical thinking, how are you going to survive? A musket. If you're dealing with older kids, you can actually talk about a musket, or have somebody, at least maybe they couldn't bring the gun to school, but the muskets were not very accurate. So you practically had to get a headshot from about 5 inches away to get a deer or anything like that. I don't remember them bringing crossbows, so that probably wasn't very common. So the additive approach, you'd be looking more information, more accurate information. Now the transformation, or the transformative approach, it talks about the structure of the curriculum has changed to enable students to view concepts, issues, events, and themes from the perspectives of diverse ethnic and cultural groups. Well, obviously, how would you see the first Thanksgiving in terms of the Native Americans? That's something that's obviously very challenging and would have been overlooked. This on a level in high school or college or middle school, upper elementary, you would actually study the Native tribes and the cultures and the Native tribes in the areas where the Pilgrims would have moved. A lot of the places up there named are the names of Native tribes, like Narragansett is one tribe I know in Rhode Island area, and they have very long names. Massachusetts probably was a Native tribe. I know Missouri was a name of a tribe, and Kansas was a name of a tribe. They called them the Kansa. Okay, a lot of people may not realize Dakota, Lakotas. But the transformative approach is going to obligate you as a teacher to develop a curriculum that allows students to explore, to find out details about what really might have happened at the first Thanksgiving. And here's something to really get you. Was there even such a thing? Go back and look. It's so American to talk about Thanksgiving. We just assumed there was pumpkin pie and turkey and dressing. And we almost can be assured that the way they cooked, that would be really interesting in itself. What was cooked, how it was cooked. Imagine that people that are probably bent on possibly killing you, you invite them to a big Thanksgiving. You have picnic tables. Well, they didn't have picnic tables, but there was some kind of a meeting, but there had to be terrible tension there. You had two different groups that know nothing about each other, or very little, and they're frightened. Native Americans see these people coming in. They have big ships. They have weapons. They're going to be a threat to the individuals right there in the Plymouth colony. I mean, Plymouth colony is going to be a threat to the natives. You're violating their space. It's almost as if you were to have a Thanksgiving and aliens came in a spaceship and you said, hey, come on in, we're going to have pie. You know, one cannot underestimate the cultural shock on both sides, because literally the United States as we know it didn't exist. It was a huge northern continent. You know, South America had been well explored by the Spaniards for a time of been 100 years since the Spaniards had taken Mexico in 1520, so 1620. And so if we look at this, you can see that this would be similar to individuals appearing, explorers or something appearing at the home of or in the land of a tribe, and you bring your families with you, and you bring weapons, and you have totally different clothes in different ways, and you look different, you definitely smell different. The level of defense, which I talked about that before, the level of defense, siege mentality, fear, would be intense, and it would be a legitimate fear. We do know that the Native Americans suffered terribly from smallpox and diseases brought by the Europeans, and we also know that they retaliated, they fought against them. And frankly, if you come in, I don't know, a ship full of people, maybe 200 to 500 people, and whole families, and then there were cases like, I think there was they called it Jamestown, did not succeed in Virginia, and there was a lost colony in Virginia around 1607 that when the people came back, they didn't find, they returned and the people were gone. There was this Croat or Toa, a strange word carved on a tree in Virginia, and they never found the people. They were gone. They assumed they died, but then they didn't know if they were wiped out or driven out or taken as slaves or whatever. They just disappeared. So that's a mystery colony in Virginia. So there was a real odds of you'd just be gone. People would come back and pilgrims had disappeared because they could easily have been wiped out had there been a concerted effort just to take them out. So the transformative approach means you're going to break with the traditional assumptions about Thanksgiving. And if you're going to transform anything, you're not only going to transform the stereotype or alter it, but you're going to focus on the perspective of the natives. Now, I'm giving the example of Thanksgiving. The social action approach, students make decisions on important social issues. Now, obviously, you're not going to have social issues. You're going to discuss how we're going to help the pilgrims get along because that's historical. But is there a current state of tension between groups that are radically different from each other? They may not, they may know each other, that each other exists, but there could be real tense situations in the world. And we got plenty of them in the United States. Tense situations between groups. We've had, the shootings and African-American protests and general protests claiming police brutality or police indifference. That's one example. What about conflicts between Islamic Americans or individuals from the Middle East versus those that are, different in some way? I could say typical white Christian, but it could be, we can find examples of groups that are right next to each other, but they may not get along. Okay. And that's really the theme I take from Thanksgiving, because we're not going to have a situation like that very well. Except, I just thought of something. What if we had the concept of Thanksgiving and we had new refugees coming into the community? Lexington's had this, people from Somalia, refugees from a war zone. These individuals, almost all of them, I think, are Islamic, Muslim. They have very strict traditions. The women wear the hijab, the head covering. And I'm generalizing, I'm not stereotyping. You know the difference between stereotyping and generalizing? Stereotyping is when you assume someone you haven't met yet or you've just met, that because you have this generalization, it must apply to everybody. That's when you stereotype. When you don't take the time to find out about the individual, you just assume they must fit this particular viewpoint. It might be real positive, it might be real negative. See, stereotypes can be positive. Some people love that, Used to be years ago, people thought Americans would visit their country, and this is back in the 50s, you know, I'm not talking now, but they would assume, oh, Americans, they're all movie stars and they've got money. People used to watch a show called Dallas on TV. It was a show about rich people with oil money in Dallas, Texas. And people would watch that in other countries, and they thought, that's the Americans. They cheat on their wives, they have affairs, they spend a lot of money, they deceive people. And, oh, I've got a joke, but I'm going to keep it to myself because it's too funny. But it's a Texas joke. But anyhow, it even affected me. I said, I think those Dallas Texans must be like that, you know, the oil people. But I lived in Oklahoma, so I knew oil people. So there's some truth in it. But transformational, let me get back to that. When you go through the curriculum and you go to that third stage or the fourth stage, you're dealing with real people. You're dealing with facts, not fiction. You're dealing with the relationships. You're going from what you think or what you've read about or what people have told you, gossip, stereotypes, rumors, generalizations. You go to actually being in contact. If there's a conflict between two groups, whatever that conflict is, you could live near a reservation, a lot of Native Americans. And frankly, I don't know much about Native Americans. I knew something about Native Americans in Oklahoma, but it was a different relationship. In Nebraska, I think there may be a lot more conflict. Now, I know there is in other states, conflict between groups and a lot of racism, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where social action, which it talks about in the fourth one, that's where it matters. See, the purpose of teaching a multicultural education curriculum is not just to have people know a little bit about a lot of different groups, but to develop critical thinking skills about how to encounter and how to fairly assess and do research and genuinely seek to understand and interact with people that are different. It's not, multicultural is not a garnish on the salad. It's not a flag waving. As I mentioned earlier, that's just shallow stuff. Flag waving, hey, tacos, hey, tamales, hey, crepe Suzette or something, you know, French food or something. Or, you know, French are they eat snails, you know, and people don't know what that means. And, you know, I have the good fortune that my family's moving in a direction, or maybe I already have a daughter-in-law who's Russian, and I may have other relatives from different parts, different states, different ethnic groups. And so I'll be exposed to a lot of different food and customs. I know with the Russians, they hug, you know, they grab you. They just, you know, when you hug, it's not just shaking hands or grabbing the arm. No, it's the full hug and the little kiss on the cheek. It's really not a kiss. It's more of a cheek-to-cheek thing. Kind of like I used to think Hollywood people did. It was kind of fakey. But the Russians, this is the genuine deal. This is how you greet people. And so we've learned to do that. When I greet my daughter-in-law's parents and her sister and other relatives, you know, you don't just shake hands. That doesn't cut it. So you can't be a little fearful of getting too close to people or something. My roots being a person who grew up in rural Missouri, we didn't really, you know, all I remember is we were driving our truck or a car down the road and see our neighbor, or I'm on a tractor. I'd give them not the finger, but sometimes you do this finger. You didn't do the middle finger, but you'd say hi or you'd nod, and that's good enough, you know. If you met people, you'd say hi, but if you knew them, you didn't shake hands every time you met them. Some cultures, you always show respect and you shake hands. Well, those are the kind of details you get into when you go through the transformative and the social action. You say multicultural, it has to be delightful. It has to deal with the culture and the habits and with the beauty And I'm going to tell you right now, the key to this, and this is my own quote, is you cannot appreciate another culture until you see the beauty in it. If you always see it as something less than yours or something, if you say, well, I don't understand Islam and I don't understand their ways or their food or their prayers, and it's not attractive to me. I see nothing beautiful in it. You need to see something beautiful in it. I'm not going to tell you what you have to see beautiful in it, but it means you respect it. There are a lot of different cultures I've encountered in my life, and I'm not a world traveler, so you're hardly talking to Mr. Worldly guy. But I do know I've dealt with so many people from different countries, from Malaysia, from India, Pakistan, China, Japan, Taiwan, Sweden, Irish, Danes, Scotland, English, and certainly a lot of Latin Americans, Hispanics, few Canadians, and people from different parts of the United States. And I knew it was important that I find something in their culture that I really admired. It might be their religion. It might be their family unit. It could be many things as far as that goes. Usually it was more than just the food. I mean, you can have the food without the person, but food's great because it's something we can all talk about and kind of agree, hey, that's something I want to talk about. So I hope this has helped a little bit. I just wanted to add this because I wanted to give you the example of the Pilgrims, because that's historical and everybody knows that. It's not something alien. I'm not saying culture A and culture B. That's something you encounter. Christmas, or how Christmas has turned into a big commercial holiday in places where they're not Christians. They didn't have Christmas, but by gosh, it's a great time to make a buck. That's kind of interesting, Okay, I'm going to shut up now because I'm just going to give you the audio of this because you'll like listening to me more than looking at me.